let me start by thanking the organizers of the celebrations of Devaraj Ars's birthday for the invitation to speak to the group. He was a man who meant a lot to me in my academic career because I was able to get going partly because he was such a remarkable, he had such a remarkable story to tell, and I was able to tell that. But he also, as you will see, he also touched my heart as he touched the hearts of many people in Mysore or Karnataka. He is well worth remembering. We don't celebrate, we don't remember the birthdays of many chief ministers across India. I can think of maybe 2 or 3, but there have been a lot more than that. But this man was something special. He had a way about him personally in front of small meetings, but also in front of huge crowds of people, which was disarming and entertaining, as I will explain. And he also had a huge impact on the politics of Karnataka, changing the rules, as I will explain, by breaking the dominance which the 2 landed castes in Karnataka had exercised since independence, and opening the system to disadvantaged groups. And he did this. This happened in other states as well, but it tended to happen later in other states. For example, you may remember the KHAM, K-H-A-M strategy in Gujarat, which was somewhat similar to that of Devaraj Ars, but he was the pioneer. He's the one who opened the way, developed the model, which others then followed. And so it's a great privilege and pleasure to talk about him in this setting. As many of you may know, Devaraj Ars came from the small Arasu community of Mysore state, the princely state, and it was the community of the princely rulers of that state. But before independence, he was drawn strongly to the Congress freedom struggle, and he joined the Karnataka, or the Mysore Congress, as it was called, to campaign for democracy in the princely state. That alienated somewhat the princely rulers, but he was determined, committed, and he kept on. And after the struggle succeeded, he was elected to the Legislative Assembly, and eventually he held ministerial portfolios. But the top jobs in the Congress government in Mysore, Karnataka in those days mostly went to the 2 dominant landed groups, the Lingayats and the Wakaligas. They used their dominance over village life to dominate state politics in that era. Then in 1969, the Congress Party split, and those landed groups mostly remained in power in Karnataka within what was called the Congress O, the opposition Congress, led by Mr. Nijilingappa, who was a Lingayat leader from Karnataka. That Congress O opposed Indira Gandhi's version of the Congress Party, which was called, as you probably know, the Congress R. Devaraj Ars joined Mrs. Gandhi's version of the Congress, and he became its leader in Mysore, Karnataka. But at first, he had very limited support from powerful politicians in the state. He told me at one time that when he started out, he had only a signboard outside the party office and not much real organization or support. But he was a good organization builder, and he was a shrewd analyst. And he concluded that if the disadvantaged groups in the state, who greatly outnumbered Lingayats and Wakaligas, if the disadvantaged groups could be mobilized, then things might change in the state's politics. He was gambling that a political awakening amongst ordinary people, poor people, disadvantaged groups. A political awakening had gone far enough that they might support an appeal to their interests, and that maybe that could overturn the landed group's dominance of state politics. And it turned out he was right. At the 1971 national election, the Lok Sabha election, Indira Gandhi's campaign, which stressed Garibi Hatao, abolish poverty, Indira Gandhi's campaign enabled her Congress R, led by Urs, to win all 27 of the seats, Lok Sabha seats in Karnataka. It was a major shock for the Congress O, for Mr. Nijalingappa, and for the dominant landed groups in Karnataka. And the following year, 1972, there was a state election, and that led to another Congress R victory. And Devaraj Urs became the first chief minister of the state from outside the two landed groups. And he knew, as soon as he took power, that Wakaligas and Lingayats would try to oust him from power. One very strong Wakaliga leader had remained in the Congress R with Mrs. Gandhi and Devaraj Urs, and that was K. Hanumanthaya, the former chief minister of the state, but he was a union minister far away in Delhi. And there were a few others who had, from the dominant landed groups, who backed Devaraj Urs. So as chief minister, he began providing disadvantaged groups with more than just promises. Senior government ministries went to OBCs, Muslims, scheduled castes, and many of them had been people that Devaraj Urs had to go out and recruit, draw into politics from obscurity. But they turned out mostly to be a talented team of ministers, headed by a very skilled and active chief minister, Mr. Urs, who developed government programs to benefit disadvantaged groups. One key program was a land reform scheme. This gave the ownership of 1.25 million acres to former tenants. It tried to abolish tenancy. Since much of the state had the lowest levels of landlessness in all of British India, including Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India as we know it now. Since Mysore or Karnataka had the lowest incidence of landlessness, tenancy was an important problem. And landlessness, as Devaraj Urs said to me, was much harder to overcome. But the landless, nonetheless, received free house sites from the government, and that made up for the lack of progress on landlessness. Pardon me. So, unlike many of Mrs. Gandhi's chief ministers, Devaraj Urs delivered real substance to disadvantaged groups, to poor people. He followed up on her Garibi Hatao slogan with real action. In some other Congress-ruled states, that was not true. For example, a West Bengal IAS officer once told me that he had a message from his chief minister, Siddhartha Shankar Roy, Congress R chief minister, saying that the next day, all officials in West Bengal were to announce that land reform had been completed. No action had been taken, no land reform had happened, but Siddhartha Shankar Roy nonetheless rammed through this phony announcement. And the IAS officers shook their heads, issued the announcement, and got on with business. In Karnataka, in Mysore, that was not the case. The land reforms that happened were real. Their long-term result has been debatable, and it has not necessarily transformed everything, but it had real substance at the time. Devaraj also went further. He provided reservations for disadvantaged groups, especially for the backward classes, who we now call OBCs. Those groups actually outnumbered the Wakaligas and Lingayats put together. So they were a major potential political base. The head of the Backward Classes Commission, which Devaraj created, Mr. Hawanur, advised the chief minister that both landed groups, both Wakaligas and Lingayats, should be excluded from the reservations for the backward classes. Now, Urs was a visionary, but he was also a pragmatic realist. And he knew that excluding both of these groups was asking for big political trouble. And so Devaraj got the Wakaligas, but not the Lingayats, included in the backward class reservation list. And as a result of that, it was much easier to maintain the program after that. Devaraj also knew, as he stressed to me in interviews that we had, that many Wakaligas, who he had known in the southern part of the state in his youth, many Wakaligas were not really prosperous people. They were not all rich landowners. And the same was true, for that matter, of Lingayats. And so he believed that some of the disadvantaged members of those two communities would also support him as he went along. And here again, it turned out that he was right. He had a remarkable record for the accuracy of his political calculations. In 1978, there was a new state election. Indira Gandhi's Congress, that Urs's party, was in ruins across most of India. But Devaraj led that Congress party to victory and re-election in Karnataka. It was an endorsement of his efforts over so many years. In other words, by then it was clear that he had done something historic. He had changed the rules of politics in Karnataka forever. He had changed the rules so that to gain and to retain power in the state, political parties had to include many diverse social groups, perhaps some prosperous people, but also disadvantaged groups, which he favored. Another reason that Devaraj won that re-election campaign in 1978 was that during the emergency in Karnataka, which extended from 1975 to early 1977, he had done his best to spare the state from the excesses seen elsewhere. Excesses took place, but he was trying to restrain them. He also found, by the way, that the extra powers that he gained during the emergency made it easier for him to ram through the land reform and deliver lots of land to tenants across the state. In his whole career, Devaraj's main focus was on bridge building bridges across divisions of caste, class, and religion. And this was very similar to the focus of Karnataka's Congress government today. In its recent state election campaign, the Congress in Karnataka stressed bridge building across diverse social groups. And we now see the Congress government doing the same thing since the election. Congress is offering an attractive combination of things. Mr. Siddharamaya's Ahinda strategy, which is a huge effort at bridge building across divisions between disadvantaged groups. This effort has very strong echoes of Devaraj Arsa's grand strategy. It's very difficult to see the difference between Devaraj Arsa's approach and that of Mr. Siddharamaya and the Ahinda effort. But Congress now has also built bridges to landed groups, as Devaraj Arsa himself tried to do. And that effort in Karnataka today is spearheaded by Mr. Shiva Kumar. This is a major effort at building a diverse coalition of interest across caste, class, and religion. It's also important to remember the way that Devaraj Arsa succeeded in winning popular support. He offered people good humor and charm. I've seen this in private conversations with Devaraj Arsa many times. He always made me laugh when I interviewed him to get information from him. I not only got information, I was entertained. And I have to say that over 50 years, I have interviewed hundreds and hundreds of Indian politicians, and they almost never made me laugh. But Devaraj Arsa did so every time. But what's much more important than my meetings with Devaraj Arsa is that he also entertained people and gave people warmth and good humor when he spoke to large crowds. I can recall him speaking to very large numbers of people and getting them laughing as he went along in a kind of mutual show of affection. He was always entertaining. He reached large crowds of people, not with loud, intimidating boasts about his supposed strength, not with expressions of contempt and spite for opponents. Instead, Devaraj Arsa eased people with good humor into a sympathetic acceptance of the need for solidarity across economic and social divisions. In other words, what he was offering was a Gandhian message. A Gandhian message that stressed that we are all bound together by our common humanity. There is nothing more Gandhian than that. And the result, as one Karnataka governor told me in confidence when he was governor, when Devaraj Arsa was chief minister, the governor told me that, quote, the people love him. And that affection that the people had for him was apparent in many mass meetings that I witnessed. Today, we miss Devaraj Arsa, but we also celebrate him on his birthday, a day worth marking, because his humane vision lives on. Thank you.